Bergen-Fischer Media.
Is it possible to change things? Can I rise above the flood? Will the process cleanse my soul?
Hey, I want to welcome everybody back to the In the Blood podcast on video again. I think this is the third week in a row. With me today, as usual, is Jason the Pooh Bear Moore. Or do you prefer Dice Man?
Speaking of poo.
And also with us is longtime friend of not just this show, but another one we used to do, Amber Schultz. Amber, welcome back.
Hi, so excited to be here.
Excited to have you here.
It's been a minute.
Yeah, so the last time we talked to you, I don't think you had even started your YouTube channel yet. Do you want to just give us just a brief rundown of what that's all about so people have an idea of who the hell they're talking to today?
Yeah, so back in 2022, I launched Fundy Freed from where I grew up in a cult in the independent fundamental Baptist world. And I started deconstructing in my early 20s on into my adulthood up to now, and left the church and wanted to give space for people to be able to share their stories and also to share my own and to see where people ended up afterwards, because some people clung to their faith and some people did not. And I wanted to give a balanced view of how people deconstructed and found their new path post leaving the church. And so it's been steadily growing since 2022. And I know I've had you on, AC, for one of the interviews, and it's been phenomenal. The outreach I've been able to get, and like the people I've gotten to meet through the whole thing. And so, yeah, I'm really excited for 25. I had a little bit of a hiccup this year in my personal life, so I had to take a step back, but 2025 is going to be a big launch. So I'm excited.
Cool.
No, it's kind of awesome because I mean the subject matter of your channel kind of ties in with what we were hoping to talk about today, which is what does it mean to be open-minded? Now, you and I both come from faith backgrounds. We both landed in different places. Jason has never had any faith in his life, at least in the religious context. And I think we all take different approaches to open-mindedness. I mean, maybe we don't.
Mm-hmm.
We'll find out now. So I'll throw a question out, and I'll let Jason, you and Amber can fight over who's going to start answering it first. And that first question, the first question is, what does open-mindedness mean to you?
So I'll go ahead and jump in because I've been thinking about this for a hot minute, actually. Open-mindedness to me means that I'm willing to hold on to my ideas and my belief system, to have my moral code, but also with the room of being able to grow and change that. Because with the background, everything was so black and white. It was either right or wrong. It was either sin or it was holy. And coming out of that world, I realized there's so much bigger of a gray area than there is black and white. Is murder bad? Yes, that's a black and white subject. But, there's a lot of other things that don't fall under that category. So being willing to hear new ideas and being challenged by those things that you hold dear, and allowing other people to express their opinions and their emotions, and even being willing to adopt it if you find that you're wrong, that to me is what open-mindedness is.
I would have to mirror very much what Amber just said, because that's exactly how I see it. Open to the idea, not locked into anything concrete.
Mm-hmm.
Willing to hear somebody else's opinion, take what's needed, throw away, discard the rest, because it's an opinion. We don't have to hold everybody else's opinions, but we have to be open-minded enough to listen and possibly pull up the little nuggets that we see valuable. Learn, grow, move forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's elements to what you said, Amber, that resonate with me. I also came up in a very black and white environment where things were either of God or they were not of God, right? It was a very, very black and white line drawn between good and evil. Now, since deconverting from Christianity and migrating into a more atheistic worldview, I've realized that as far as um, being open-minded goes, I mean, it's not just questions of morality, but I mean, just embracing the idea that life is full of shades of gray. There's very, very little in the way of black and white. And one thing you said that kind of stuck out at me was something that reminded me of just how far I've come with my open-mindedness. And maybe I've migrated so far into open-mindedness that I've gone into a different form of closed-mindedness on the other end, if that makes sense. You said that there's certain the moral constants. I think the example you use that murder is bad. I would say not necessarily. There's
Oh,
extenuating circumstances. I try to be open to the idea that maybe there's something going on that I'm not aware of. Whereas I'm a super, super skeptical person, I'm also a very, very curious person. And I think that crossroads between skepticism and curiosity for me is where
mhm.
open-mindedness lives, though I don't know if I could clearly define it for myself as the two of you have done.
Mhm.
Oh, that makes sense. And like for me, a murder is like the first thing that came to my mind. But I'm thinking too, as you bring that up, if a woman kills her husband in self-defense, is that a bad thing? No, to me, it's not. So that also can make murder a gray area. It's almost like saying, abortion is bad and it's this, but at the same time, it also can save lives. So where does that line lay in the topics of abortion or anything with morality, things like that? Because really, technically, you're right. Most everything can be interpreted as gray. It's all dependent on circumstances surrounding what is happening at the time, and that we can't judge that from our perspective onto someone else because we don't know what they're going through.
Until we walk in their shoes, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I think we all kind of drifted into questions of morality as far as our open-mindedness goes. And excuse me, I got something in my throat today. I think that when we get into questions of morality, a lot of people misunderstand what morality is, especially people like you and I, Amber, who grow up in a religious environment. We get taught from an early age that morality is following the rules blindly without question,
Mm-hmm.
following what's in God's word.
Right.
But I think we've had to really rediscover what morality means to us as individuals. Now, I can't speak to your experience, but for me, I've had to redefine morality to be more a case of, okay, there are rules that as a society we hold to be valuable, which in general terms we think we should follow. What morality is, it's a process that we use to determine when the rules should or shouldn't apply based on what the situation is. Either of you have any feedback on that?
And coming from a street person background, morality is really in the eye of the beholder. Feast or famine, do you steal to eat today or do you starve till tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
Do you steal clothes? Do you break in somewhere so you got a warm place to sleep? These are all varying moralities depending on what level of or what state of living you are.
Right. It's almost like morality in itself is a privilege.
And an
Can,
'Cause
can you
oxymoron.
explain that?
well, just like to kind of piggyback on what Jason was saying is like, okay, yeah. So say I am a middle class woman, living my life. I can sit here because I have the money to say I don't have to worry about, breaking in to a place to have a warm shelter for the night. I don't have to worry about, trying to steal food from somewhere to be able to eat for my kids. And so because of where I land on that social structure, I have the privilege of having that morality or that moral code. Whereas people who are in desperation may not have the same ability or the same privilege to do so. Because even though growing up the way I did too, I grew up dirt poor. There were times that we were stealing water from a gas station because we had no water in our house. Was the stealing morally wrong? Probably yes. But was it what we needed to do to survive at the time? Yes. So that threw everything into kind of a gray area. And so I'm really glad that you brought that up, Jason. That was a really good perspective, because not a lot of people really think about that. And it just kind of hit me. Wow, morality really in itself is a privilege in some way.
Or certain moral outlooks are related to
Yes.
privilege.
Yes.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So I had, when raising my kids, I think one of the advantages I had is I could look outside of the box because I had lived outside that box for many years.
Yeah.
So I did things. I'm not going to say I did anything really illegal raising my children, but I definitely did questionable things to make sure my kids had food and to make sure
Mm-hmm.
they were safe, and use
Yeah.
my morality to put forth a boisterous personality so people knew not to mess around with my kids, not to mess around with me. Let us live.
Yeah. It boils down to, we don't know, and it all ties back to open-mindedness, because we don't know what we would do unless we were in that situation.
Mhm.
And
Well,
so,
I guess, sorry.
go ahead.
I was just going to say that this may lead into like another question about how do we balance open-mindedness with critical thinking.
Because that really translates into what a person's worldview is, and what level of critical thinking skills they have been able to develop. I know that critical thinking, autonomy, all of that was stripped from me in the religious world I grew up in. Like, you could not critically think. You did not have your own autonomy. You did not do anything unless it was laid out XYZ by whoever was the moral leader of that church. And so that's, I don't know, my brain's rolling now. Do you guys have anything to put into that?
Well, I like that you mentioned, kind of how like the critical thinking was frowned upon within the church circle for you. Because for me, it was a little bit more confusing than that. I mean, we both grew up in different cult-like versions of Christianity, so I think there's a lot of overlap. But
Mm-hmm.
um, like if I think back to my own experience, critical thinking was actually strongly encouraged. People are always telling me, "Oh no, you got to think outside of this box." I mean, I was still inside of a much larger box, but being open-minded kind of became like a point where it actually caused me a fair amount of anxiety, because it's like I'm trying to be open-minded, I'm trying to think critically, but at the same time, I'm not allowed to think too critically or open my mind up to too many different things. So it took a long time to get to the point where I could engage in both of those things without really, really stressing out about it.
So I'm going to ask another question here because I was not in that organizational situation you guys were brought up in. But did you guys really have the ability to be open-minded because such pressures on you to be Christian and beholding of the rules? How did you guys get an opportunity to really be open-minded?
There was none. There was no opportunity at all for me to be open-minded. Open-mindedness was considered a sin in my world. We had to stay by the rules. And if we stepped out at all, then we were the ones in the wrong. So, later in high school, as I started really questioning, is, morally, because all things with Christianity ties into moral. Like, we put morals and sin notations on even emotions whenever they shouldn't have like a moral code to them. But like, whenever I would think to myself, well, people in the LGBTQ community should be able to get married. Why is it a problem if they get married? In my mind, I'm open-minded and thinking this direction. But if I had verbalized that, I would have been like shunned, ostracized. I would have been like lectured, or I would have been beat, just depending on who, whether it was my dad or whether it was somebody else. And I would have been considered, backslidden and wrong, and that I needed to repent because I was thinking outside of the collective. And
You were on
so,
your way to hell.
well, being Baptist, we don't believe once you're saved that you're going to go to hell, but they actually think, side note, they think you have like little tiers in heaven. Like you can like, depends on how good you are in life, how many crowns you get, how many rewards you get, and what level you're going to be in heaven. So,
Wow.
yeah, I'm kind of screwed on that one.
So, like, my take on your question, Jason, is that critical thinking, critical analysis was strongly encouraged for things that were outside of the faith. We were expected to be open-minded with things that were ridiculous inside of the faith. And whenever something came up where it's a case, okay, like the same critical analysis that you told me to apply when it comes to government, society, all these other things, or even people that don't believe in what we believe in, if I tried applying these same things inside of the faith, then there was my dad had this favorite verse he'd always bring up: trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. And then it would be followed up with accusations of heresy, blasphemy, and like
Mhm.
everything from God can hear you thinking you're going to hell for it to, like Amber saying, getting beaten by him or somebody else within the church. It really wasn't fun. Now, what I find fascinating is that you seem so genuinely curious about our upbringing within a faith organization, whereas I feel like there may be some overlap between the limitations placed on us because of religion and the limitations placed on you because of circumstance.
Um, yeah, I didn't. So one big difference was I didn't have a guide to follow. There was no real parental interaction telling me this is good, this is bad after 7. And after 7, your whole world changes anyways because you're in a different level of consciousness. Um, but something I think I've learned along the way is critical thinking 100% is dependent on where you are in society. If you're on the streets, critical thinking is survival means.
Mhm.
If you're in a middle class scenario, critical thinking is um, dealing with the street people, dealing with, how much steak should I really buy? What kind of car should I buy? How should I treat other people?
Mhm.
Also differs between classes and when it comes to open-minded and critical thinking, because I'm thinking how to survive.
Mhm.
And you're thinking, well, how do I deal with this dirty, scungy person? Not you specifically, but in general, how do I deal with this dirty, scrunchy person? One's looking at, one's looking up.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking, I've been taught by life situations how to critically think, how to be open-mindedness, having discussions with people in every category in my adult life, anyways, and adjusting what I see as my critical thinking to accommodate whoever I'm speaking to in the moment. Not that I will fish for somebody to like me, but because I understand the critical thinking is different with where you are in society, the way I broach it verbally will be different depending who I talk to. Does that make sense?
And yeah, and that in its way is like its own way of being open-minded because you're willing to step outside of your own experience to be able to approach people where they are, wherever they are in their experience and wherever they are in whatever class they are. I think that it takes a lot of skill and a lot of like life skill to be able to get to the point where you're able to do that. Because a lot of people, still stick. Like I know people who've come out of Christianity that still have that closed-minded mentality because they have not made that done the hard work. And I'm not saying I'm not the end all be all, but like it is hard work getting all that shit out of your head and rebuilding back up a moral code and rebuilding back up how you want to be as a person. And so to be able to do that and then still be open-minded enough to go, okay, you are, you know, I'm speaking to someone of color who is a minority who is oppressed in my country. I need to approach them and talk to them and be open to them differently than I would if I was talking to someone who comes into my place of work who makes, 6 digits a year. Like, like there's like a lot there's a difference there, and there's a level of open-mindedness I think that comes with that.
I think
I
it's
think,
interesting that you both sort of migrated towards our interactions with other people and like how open-mindedness plays in there. Now I'm kind of curious, um, how does the curiosity element play into the open-mindedness when navigating others, whether it be establishing new relationships, having these like drive-by interactions with people, or even curiosity about your existing relationships when you start opening your minds to new ideas.
well, I'm going to touch on that with actually an example that Amber made. Amber brought up the point of, seeing a person of color and having to deal with them on a different level. I look at social classes. So there's another big difference between our upbringings. I don't think that, I think personally, you guys had it harder than I did, because literally you were brought up in a box with somebody telling you, this is your moral compass, this is your moral code, this is where you have to. I didn't have the home or that box. So I've always had to think outside the box because that's where I lived. So in that curiosity, I think my curiosity is governed differently than yours because I didn't have that box. Because I can look at, without encumbrance of having that 10, 20, 30 years of church going and the stuff being rammed down my throat, my curiosity level comes from where you are in society, where yours comes from the morality of the church.
Yeah. What do you think, AC?
I'm I kind of hate when these long pauses happen in a sense because I don't like rushing to fill the silence, but at the same time I don't let the silence to drag on too long. I mean, kind of where my thought process is starting to lead me is in considering Jason's version of curiosity versus my own, because whereas curiosity is something that I had to discover, because I mean it was frowned upon, it wasn't allowed. I empowered myself in a sense by figuring out how to engage in a curious process. Whereas for Jason, it sounds like curiosity was a very, very necessary survival tool. If he hadn't have been curious, he would have been dead. If he hadn't have been curious, he wouldn't have been able to find a place to sleep, to eat. He wouldn't figure out how to clothe himself. I mean, it was sort of life, just like it would be, like, I hope this doesn't sound shitty, Jason, but it sounds like you were largely running on the kind of instincts that an animal in the wild might have, whereas it's all about the hunt and the fight and discovering and or building a nest.
No, very, very much so. You're 100% on point. There's an unfortunate situation, but there's also a fortunate situation, which is where I think the three of us have a lot of overlap. Because though our upbringings were diversely different, like there was no end to the diversity between the three of us, but there's a one common bond that necessity in the end is what created for all of us the need to be open-minded, to be critical thinkers of our situations.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like for me, my curiosity stemmed from something in me knew that the way I was being raised, there had to be more to life than what my life path was supposed to be. There had to be more than church every Sunday and every time the doors open. There had to be more for me than to get pregnant and have babies as long as I can and create an army of God. And even like whenever I was still very much like very enmeshed in the church, like you would read the stories of like Esther and Ruth and Deborah and all of these women, and even the Proverbs 31 woman who literally went outside of her home and was bartering with people and is like the esteemed version of a woman. And all of that stuff is glossed over to make sure that a woman stays as that subservient counterpart to the man. And I knew I wanted more. And that need to be more, to know that I could be more, drove that curiosity, and that curiosity made it to where I had to be open-minded, because if I wanted to cross from point A to point B and continue moving forward, I had to confront things about myself that I'd been taught and realize how closed it off I really was. And it wasn't an overnight process. This has been something I've been doing since I hit like 17, 18 years old. And, it's mind-boggling to me how people are fine not being curious. Like, I want to know what drives people. I love talking to people and knowing their situation, and I don't have to know details, but I like to know what drives them, what's their passion, what makes them want to get up every day and do what they do, and what makes them want to achieve these goals and dreams. And that curiosity is like almost like this fire inside of me, which is one of the reasons why I started what I did with Fundy Freed. Is like, I want to know. And in that knowing, you get to see so many other perspectives from people. You get to hear about life experiences that you would never experience yourself. And that curiosity flamed like the open-mindedness for me, because it gave me such an opportunity to do what I wasn't supposed to do to begin with, which was live. So
I love both of your responses to things. I mean, I hear so much of me in your story, Amber, but like when I listen to Jason, I mean, there's a little bit of a difference there. And I know that, God, I can empathize with the struggle, but at the same time, I'm so envious of the freedom.
I feel the same way. I mean, and it's the terrible circumstance that you grew up in, like, and I can't even imagine. And I mean, I grew up doing desperate things, my dad doing really shitty things, but and fortunate for me, my brain has cut off most of it, so I don't remember half of it anyway, which is probably a good thing too. But that taste of that freedom, just that idea of having that freedom to build life from ground one is drawing to me. And it probably sounds terrible to say it out loud. I'm so sorry. But it's like being caged up and watching all the people and the creatures outside that cage getting to kind of figure life out, and you're still caged. And then you finally break free, but then you're behind the 8 ball the whole time. Because that's what it feels like now as an adult. I'm just like, I feel so behind. I feel like there's so much stuff that I missed out on. There's so many things I could have made choices differently if I had the opportunity to do so. And so I feel like I'm constantly trying to play catch up. Even when it comes to stuff like pop culture references, people talk about stuff in the 90s, and I'm like, I don't know. I was in like skirts to the floor and learning how to swim in denim skirts and t-shirts. I don't know what it means to watch Friends. What's that? It's like it's just a different worldview, a different desire, I guess.
Yeah, and where you're envious, I've got a similar envy because I didn't have the walls to grow up in. Though it may have been a bad situation, I didn't have the parents to have a good or bad situation in my life at the time. So I had to learn how to live inside the closed walls, where you had to learn to live outside those closed walls.
Isn't that fascinating?
Though they are totally opposite, they put us in such similar realities.
Yes. I think it gives us more of a realistic perspective on life. Mm-hmm. And it gives us more of a perspective on seeing things from a different point of view, because you grew up outside the box. AC and I grew up inside the box, but we had so much that the only word I can think of, tainted our existence and our outlook on life because of how hard it was growing up. Mm-hmm. That I don't look at other people and judge their situation, because I grew up in the shit. I know what it's like to grow up in the shit and having to survive. You grew up in the shit, knowing what it's like to have to survive. So it takes that, to me, it keeps me from feeling wholer than thou or better than, because my circumstances now are different, because I was there, or I know what it's like to be in that mindset. Like with the election that just happened to my poor country, that, but what I see whenever I see the people who support Trump or support Kamala and like the big extremes, I understand that cult mindset. I understand why these people are doing what they're doing because of the cognitive dissonance, because of what they've been told to do, because of white I can't say the word evangelicalism. And I get it. I hate it. It makes me angry because I'm on the other side of it now. But it keeps my mind open enough to go, they're not awake yet. They don't know. Because if it had been me 10, 15 years ago, I would have been just on that train just like everyone else. And it's because of what I knew.
See, I'm on the
Okay, so
opposite of that scale because I'm thinking, how can people be so indoctrinated knowing what he's done? He's a felon. And I see, well, how do you not see this? How do you follow this guy and not fall into that?
It's the exact same way these people can put pedophiles in pulpits and allow people who are abusers to run their churches, run their youth groups, because God forgives, and so should we.
Okay, so both of you are bringing up interesting things, and it's coming into the like, kind of where I was hoping to go next was to explore how each of us handles conflict when we're dealing with differences in core values, right? I mean, the example that you guys are brushing up against with Trump and putting pedophiles in pulpits and whatnot. I think each of us is in agreement that it's good to be open-minded about the people around us. Each of us is looking for common ground. But what do you do when that common ground isn't enough to distract you from the fact that there is a world of like just big ticket differences where it's a case of, okay, you are trying to tear down everything I've worked my entire life to build. Jason, how do you resolve a conflict when you're dealing with a person like that?
Now or then?
Whichever you want to lead with.
Okay, so I used to be super violent. And the second somebody started to infer or push themselves into my situation, I got obscenely violent and would physically push people back out of that circle, no matter where they came from, because my core thing was protecting me and protecting my kids. And if I don't know you, I can't trust you, so you're not getting in. And when people start to tear down what I built to believe, I used to get very, very violent, and I would physically fight. Now, growing a love for fighting out of that, yeah, I did. But when I got together with my partner, who I'm with now, I started to learn how to be more accepting, I guess, for lack of a better term. I'm not great at it by any means. Not by any means. I still get that violent. Okay, you know what? My first instinct is to shut up or I'm going to break your face. But now I can look at the situation differently because I was open-minded enough to watch my partner and see, because she has the most tender heart. She has this amazing ability to forgive and to just love because. And I found that fascinating. And that's part of the reason why I fell in love with her, because that, to me, is the epitome of being. It's something I strived for. And to live with somebody and to be able to learn that, like I said, I'm not good at it by any means. She with it is a wizard. But I now look at, okay, he's saying this. Yeah, I want to punch him. But what should I do now? How can I handle that differently? And my first reaction now is to punch. My second reaction is to think, how do I deal with this differently? And then my third reaction is, listen, bud, I really don't want to deal with that right now. That's not my shit, that's yours. Go tear it down somewhere else.
That's a lot of growth. I'm really proud of you. That's awesome. That's amazing.
It's taken me a long time.
I feel that. For me, it's still sometimes it's conflicted because I try so hard to stay in the middle of the swinging pendulum because it came from such an extreme on this side. I don't want to swing so hard to the other side that I close off my mind to people who think differently than me in like in the old way. So I'm always constantly trying to be conscious of staying somewhere in the middle. And for me, everyone around me where I live, family, friends, with the exception of a few, all voted for the One Direction that is, trying to take us back 50 years. And that was a hard day when that happened because they voted not only against me, they voted against my children. And I'm like, how can I consciously be friends with these people who are trying to take away the rights from people that I love and people, things like that. But I had to remember, like, because this is very fresh for me because of everything just happening last week. But what has helped me is realizing that most people don't really understand the weight of what they're choosing and what they're choosing to believe, because everyone, I mean, honestly, for lack of a better word, they're all sheep. Everyone, they like to have it be fed to them what they believe, so then they can not have their personal responsibility of if shit goes bad. And so I have to sit back and go, okay, this is against my moral code, but how do I want to lead my life? I want to lead my life with love, and I want to love people where they are. And that sometimes means I have to still love them whenever they choose things that hurt me. It doesn't mean I have to still be completely involved and enmeshed in them. I can love them from a distance, but I don't want to compromise my personal morals and my core values because I'm angry how they made their decision. Because in the end, that reflects back on me. I can still do what I can do. I can still choose not to put the negativity out in the world. I can still choose to love people, whether or not they voted for someone I liked or not. I can still choose to be as positive and as much of a light and teach my kids to do the same. Or I can be just like them. And being just like them takes me back to who I was in the church. And I don't want to be that. So it's kind of where I'm at right now.
No, and I'm going to start kind of where you ended up. I mean, it's a question that's come up quite a few times over the years between Jason and I, where he's asked me, like, well, how are you going to be friends with a person who's done that to you? How are you going to react with so much forgiveness when somebody has treated you like shit for so long? And my canned response has always been some version of, I don't want to let them change who I am. Because like you, I don't want to go back. I used to be that cultish, small-minded bigot. I understand the fiery passion that drives that ridiculous and destructive and inconsiderate mindset.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I also like I learned to take a step back and like even if somebody is just like if I don't see the common ground, or at least I don't want to see the common ground, I have to sometimes consciously remind myself that okay, as people, assuming that there isn't something horribly wrong, like chemically speaking, inside the brain, but speaking in general terms, as people, we want more or less the same things. We want to be happy, healthy, well-adjusted. We want to be safe. We want to be fed, whatever, right? We've got our short list of basic human needs and desires.
Mm-hmm.
We've got different ideas about how to attain these things or to achieve these things. We perceive different threats to these things, and we make decisions and we cast ballots sometimes based on these ideas of what's going to manipulate the situation most to our benefit. And it's not so much a case of, well, like I'm voting to screw over my neighbors. Is, I mean, I recognize that the other side, I mean, if we're going to stay within the context of politics here, I realize that the other side is looking at me as well and thinking, well, you're trying to tear down tradition. You're trying
Mm-hmm.
to defile the sanctity of marriage. You're trying to tear down everything that I hold to be good and true and valuable. And how dare you? And I
Mm-hmm.
was telling him, like, like my mindset is, well, the things I'm doing, they're good for you too, whether you realize it or not. If you
Mm-hmm.
just open your mind to some degree, you'd understand where I'm coming
Right.
from. They probably, in my estimation, are thinking much in the same way. So while it's difficult, if I stay focused on the fact that we're kind of all, even if it doesn't look like it, we're trying to pull for the same things, it's really,
Mhm.
really hard for me to maintain any sort of grudge or unforgiveness.
And that is also kind of how my mind became so open to like all these different types of religious beliefs. It's kind of the same thing. Is like humans have all the same base needs. Religion comes from the same basic background. It has just been all these different cultures, all the different needs of the people, the whoever is corrupt in power, whoever is not corrupt in power. It has all kind of translated down to try to provide that basic need that people want, and that's the safety and the health and like the stability and all the things. And we want to thrive, and at the end of the day, humankind is still animalistic. We're still going to do what we can and fight to the bone to keep that moral code that keeps my family right here right now, this my little circle, safe. We especially Americans, we do not think as a typically not supposed to be thinking as a collective. We think of like what is independent for us, my family right now. What's happened over the last few years, it's become more apparent how collective each side are. But that mindset, thinking what affects me and mine is all that matters, keeps us from thinking of how it affects our neighbor. So, because, Jim Bob over here only associates with a bunch of, white dudes with pickup trucks, of course, he's not going to think that voting one or the other is going to like fuck with him or not. It doesn't matter because he's still going to get up every single day, go do his job, do his thing, come home. He doesn't think about the minorities that are down in downtown Knoxville or the people who are on the streets because whatever he's voting doesn't affect his own section. And I have to keep that in mind that not a lot of people think in a broader term of how is this going to affect the entire community? How's it going to affect the entire country? It's going to be, they think about how does this line up with my belief in God? And does that align with also keeping my family safe in what my view of what that safety is? And that's why people get so heated about such topics is because it hits both of those things that are very close to that vein for people. If that, I feel like I was rambling a lot right there, but I hope that made sense.
Mhm.
I can't help but wonder, Jason. I mean, like she's speaking from a religious context mostly, but I think that's more the frame of what she's putting a kind of like a tribalistic mindset into. Like when we're running with a social circle, that tends to be our whole world at certain times in life. With you being a street kid, you've described to me quite a few times that like you were like out and about intermingling with society, but society didn't see you. So as a result, you kind of were living in this shrunken little world that floated through the bigger world out there. Did you ever really consider how the things you were doing were affecting life outside of your tight-knit collective?
No, I honestly did not. Until I had kids where I had a collective, I didn't because I was very much a lone wolf. I had people I traveled with sometimes, but even in my street family, there was no consistency. Everybody was always going their way. We considered each other family when we saw each other. It was like we were there 2 minutes ago. But being a lone wolf, there's no collective to consider. I just thought, well, I'm breathing today. I need to eat. Need to go panhandle, make some money. I'm I'm going to sideline here back to something Amber said, just because I'm very curious. I'm going to put it on both of you. You both talk about looking at people with love. Um, AC, you and I in the past have had conversations about how you look at things with, you see people and, your first instinct is to love them and accept them. And as you just said in your ramble that you called it, um, I have a really hard time, and I try to be as open-minded as possible, but if they're not directly inter if they're not directly in my inner circle, which is like 6 people, how do you love outside of that? Because there's, in my opinion, and remember, it's just my opinion, so I'm going to put it out there. If it's good for you, use it. If not, throw it away to the people listening. But if they're not in your direct circle, how can you instinctually love them because they've had no influence, they've had no reason to be loved? You could be loving an axe murderer, you could be loving a child molester, you could be loving. How do you get that level of trust to love somebody else? Because to be honest, and I don't think I ever will, I don't have that. If I don't know you, I don't care. And to be totally honest, if you hurt one of mine, I will as easily slit your throat as I will spit on you and walk away.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to hurt mine, there's no love there. There's no hate either, though. It's neutral. I don't know you. I don't care about you, whatever. How can you guys love like that? And do you think it's part of the conditioning from the church, or is it something you have developed independently even after the church?
I'm gonna jump on top of Amber here because I like being pushy sometimes. Um, I think that for me, it's not just the conditioning of the church. That certainly plays in because I mean, when you get brought up being told to love your enemies, love your neighbor as yourself, that's the kind of philosophical thing that sticks even when you abandon the core values of the church. Moving beyond the religious upbringing, I mean, kind of where I've ended up is in a position where I'm very, very much looking at the social contract, right? It's not necessarily driven by love, maybe in the sense that you're understanding it, at least for me. It's kind of a case of, like if you're standing on like a subway platform, you've got a reasonable amount of trust that you're not going to get pushed in front of the train because you wouldn't push another person in front of the train. We look out for strangers in subtle little ways all the time. To me, this is just an extension of that. If I'm considering the well-being of others, it's really because I'm hoping that in doing so, that's going to come back on me, where they're going to consider the well-being of myself and the people I care about. To varying degrees, anybody who lives in a city, anybody who lives in a society, whether they hate other people or not, they're still considerate on some level. You have to be, or you're not going to function as a member of that society. Anyways, that's my TED Talk.
No, for me, I think some of mine is also kind of like selfishly driven sometimes because um growing up and made to feel less than my whole life, I never wanted that feeling to be put onto anyone else, especially by me. And so everyone that I meet, I have an already baseline level of love for. Now, to me, love is gray. Love can be very different, like for very different people. The person that walks into where I work and I meet them for 5 minutes, that connection, that camaraderie, and that love I have for them, just because they're basically human beings, is very different than the love I have for my kids. There's like tears to it, and so the baseline driving force is I want people to always feel they have at least one bit of love from somebody in the world. But I've had to learn over the years that there, like I said, that there's that difference in love. Like my love for someone is not an attachment. I care for you because you're a human and it's your basic human right to be loved and cared for. Just like it's my basic human right. Someone told me once it was a birthright. And I'm like, I really like that saying because it is our birthright to be loved and respected by other people. It just gets convoluted because the world sucks. And if I can be the one person that person sees in a day, in a week, or in a year that gives them that little piece of what they deserve, then that makes me so happy to be able to do that. Now, my love has limits. Cross me a certain way, come after my kids, find out you are a pedophile or axe murderer. Obviously, that changes the whole ball game. But I have always wanted to feel that love and be loved for who I am right now in that moment, because I change so much. I'm always growing, that I want to extend that love out to other people. So say there's a guy or girl comes into work, and that day they're just having a really shitty day, and if I can put a smile on their face, that is a form of love. That is me loving that person in that moment, and I may never think of them again, ever. But I had that ability to share that love that I have in me to them, to at least kind of give them a little bit of happiness. And I also believe that what I put out in the world comes back. Karma, whatever you want to call it, the energies that we put into the world comes back to us. And so if I am wanting to live this life that is so vastly different than what I was supposed to have, I have to put that out there for that to come back to me. And so I guess in a way is kind of a selfish motivator, but at the same time, it's just who I am. Like, that love part of myself is just ever engulfing, and I love everyone that I come across just for the fact they're human. Now, however that love grows, diminishes, totally it changes on after they open their mouth. But everyone is met with that baseline of love and acceptance for me until they show me a reason why I shouldn't, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
I don't know like how many people have heard it before. I mean, I'm just gonna chase down a rabbit trail before shifting into the final question. Sam Harris years ago did a TED talk. I think the title was Science Can Answer Moral Questions. And one of the things he brought up, which really ties into your inquiry, Jason, was basically saying that all acts of altruism are are born out of human survival instinct. You know, like I'm going to do good for others. I'm going to treat them kindly. I'm going to be charitable. I'm going to this, that, and the other thing selfishly because the time will come where I'm going to need to be on the receiving end. And basically, if I've paid my dividends, then I'm going to be able to make a withdrawal from the society bank later. So it's not that we're instinctually kind-hearted and wonderful people. No, at the end of the day, I think we're animals working on instinct. We've just learned to refine and upscale our instincts. You know, we like to say, well, we get these human-like qualities. We like to separate ourselves from the animal kingdom. But at the end of the day, I think the most basic value that all living things share is we're just trying to not get dead.
It's true. And if it means that I'm like kind and happy and loving to everybody and I don't end up dead by the end of the day, I've done all right.
Yeah, I would say like living through the day is a win, right, Jason?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so the final question that I wanted to explore with you two today is, what do you think makes people change their minds?
I
Well,
think life circumstances, if it hits you square in the face, will make you sometimes challenge everything that you believe. I think that there are things that you cannot plan for, there's things that you cannot pray for or pray away, and you are going to be challenged to either look in the mirror and go, what I believe right now is not working, and how can I fix this? Or be stuck in the same cycle. And everyone has a choice at some point, sometimes multiple times in their life, to be able to do that.
um, I more or less agree with you. I'm going to jump out from that point there. I think the willingness to accept that we can change is what opens our mind to outside influence, to bring in someone else's perspective, to be accepting of someone else's perspective, so we can, like I said earlier, take those little nuggets. So I think in order for a person to change, they have to be someone who really understands who they are, and they really have to understand what they're looking for. And in that, in the beginning, you have to be open-minded enough to research that and find out for yourself.
A lot of people stop there because it's such a challenge to face yourself.
Mirrors are not always people's friends.
No.
No, and I feel like I'm kind of landing sort of in the middle of your two perspectives because I mean, Amber, you talked about circumstances kind of hitting you in the face. Jason, you'd mentioned again, just like a different twist on like the personal experience. If I look back on the first time I really changed my mind about something that was like big from my perspective at the time, because I was still very, very much wrapped up in this petty Christian morality, these warped ideas about right and wrong. And I thought that being gay was a lifestyle choice. I thought being gay was wrong and sinful. And I went to a party, and it seemed like everybody at the party was gay except for me. And when I went into the kitchen to grab a beer, there was one guy who, this is going to sound stupid. There was a guy in there drinking a beer who looked straight. And so I went to talk to him. It's like, holy crap, brother. Like, it's so nice to like meet somebody who's like not insert homophobic slur here. And he said, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm actually gay too. And I realized that I could be so wrong about things based on my understanding and my observations. And through chatting with this guy, I realized that like a gay man is just a man,
Yeah.
right? They're just people. Like, weird concept, right? And I realized that, God, I would really hate to be reduced to somebody's initial take on me based on whatever superficial and unfair characteristic they were observing. And I realized that if I can have it so wrong with something I was so sure of, just in this one instance, maybe I could be wrong about a lot of different things. And it's one of the things that I think frustrates Jason sometimes with me is like maybe I change my mind a little bit too easily. Like I'll almost like channel surf with my positions, because if you can present me with new and compelling information, I'm not really stuck to most of the things that I hold to be true these days because I've been wrong for so much of my life. It would take an enormous amount of unjustified ego to remain firm in the idea that I'm correct about everything.
Hmm. No, I feel the same way because I feel like because I was thought I was so right for so long. Like I had all the answers. I knew what God said. I knew what the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church said about everything from A to Z. I was like the star Bible student. I knew all the things. I knew all the arguments. I knew the answers. But whenever it came down for me for real life, those answers did not hold water. And one of the biggest things that made me step back and go, "Oh God," was whenever my ex came back from the military from Afghanistan, and I talked about it before, where he severe PTSD and he was suicidal, and all these things were going on, and I was told just pray it away, and that was like the way we're supposed to handle it. But really, in reality, I had to go, no, this isn't working. What's really working is therapy and medication, which I was told was the wrong thing to do. So if I'm wrong on something like this, that carries so much weight that a person's life hangs in the balance, what else was I wrong about? And so it was like moments like, and I've changed little things here in the in between, but it was almost like every major life happening from the time I was 20 up until current is something that really made me go, something click in my brain, go, wait a second. Why do you believe this? Why exactly do you hold true to this value? And yeah, so it just, those things are what made my brain shift a lot because I wasn't always right. I'm still not, but at least now I'm willing to admit it.
And so with that, I'm gonna because you guys brought the LGBTQ into the scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Though I had prejudices, they weren't to race, they weren't to creed, they weren't to lifestyle or orientation. Gay people, lesbians, people who had the belief that they were somebody else were part of my world. There was no judging; they were just family. Where my prejudice came from was people with money and influence.
Mm-hmm.
Your privilege creates uncomfortableness for me, therefore, I don't like you. You're different. The prejudice a lot of people have about Black or LGBTQ, I had towards people who had money and who had power because they were crushing people like me.
Right.
I was a statistic because I didn't have the money, because I wasn't the middle class, because I wasn't the upper echelons of society. That's where, though it was still a prejudice, that's where the difference was.
Okay, so I want to give each of you room for some closing thoughts. I'm going to start with you, Amber, if you want to just anything you want to cap off the conversation with, and maybe also let people know where they can find you and what you're working on. And then we'll get to Jason.
Yeah, so I have to say I'm really happy to be back on here with you guys. It's always so much fun to talk to you guys because there's such different perspectives, similar, but it's always thought-provoking, and I love it. So you can find my work on social media on Facebook and YouTube under Fundy Freed. And I'm actually gearing up and starting to interview and record more interviews for next year. So anyone wanting to share their story, I'm happy to hear, reach out to me via my links. Yeah, exactly, Jason. I need to get you on. And yeah, I think that this topic of open-mindedness could not have come for a better time, especially since I'm American and there's a lot of shit going on. I don't know how it's going up y'all's direction, but I think right now the conversation of still being open-minded is super, super important because like we've covered, everyone has their own life experience there. Everyone has their own perspective on things. And if we can still hold true to our moral code that we have for ourselves and also still be open-minded to try to understand why people are doing the things that they do, then we're going to still have a chance to have a better society. That's my hope. Fingers crossed on that. So that's what I had to say. I never know what to say.
So about how we all are doing up here.
Yes.
Try to take your slang there. It doesn't matter what animal it comes from. You still don't want to step in the shit. We're dealing with Trudeau. You're dealing with Trump. Dog shit compared to horse shit. You don't want to step into your one.
I like Trudeau. Sorry, it's your closing thoughts. I'll shut up.
First off, Amber, we love you.
Let's do.
I just want to let people know out there that I've learned a lot today. I've learned a different way I can start looking at people from you two. I don't have to love everybody like I had perceived loved in my heart. I can love differently. So that's something I'm not going to put in my toolbox, Amber. Thank you. And I'm going to try to share it. And I'm going to try to be a better person because of it. But I want to encourage everybody out there to be open-minded, to be able to listen to somebody you don't like. Pay more attention to the people you don't like, or sorry, no, let me rephrase that. Pay as much attention to the people you don't like as you do like, because those are the opinions. They're going to give you the little nuggets that you can take and change who you are for the better. Because none of us want to be who we are tomorrow. We want to be better tomorrow than we were today. So take that, move forward. Take some words of Take some words of wisdom from the lovely Amber and love. Make it something different today.
Well, I think I had something prepared as far as closing thoughts, but I think sharing it at this point would be trampling on the beautiful words that both of you had shared. So I'm going to put a pin in that and instead encourage everybody to think about the closing words from Amber and Jason. Consider especially the emotion that seems to be coming from Jason's perspective. Use that to fuel your own curiosity. Use that to express your own open-mindedness. And until next time, my friends, sincerely, much love.